Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. Have you ever experienced a moment so awful, so gut-wrenching, that it permanently shifts the way you see people? That was this Christmas for me. I walked into my parents' house expecting the usual chaos, kids running around, carols playing, the smell of turkey in the oven. What I didn't expect. For my parents to humiliate my children in front of the entire family. What I didn't expect. To walk out of there knowing I'd never go back. It wasn't always like this. Growing up, Christmas was magical. My mom went all out, decorating the house, baking cookies, making sure every detail was perfect. My dad? He played the role of the slightly grumpy but ultimately loving father who grumbled about the mess but always made sure the holidays felt special. And as a kid, I ate it up. The warmth, the excitement, the feeling of being part of something bigger. And I wanted that for my kids, too. But somewhere along the way, that magic died. Maybe it was when I got married. Maybe it was when my wife, Sarah, and I had kids, our two amazing, loud, sometimes chaotic kids, Leo and Lily. Maybe it was when I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way my parents favored some grandkids over others. The way subtle jabs at my parenting turned into outright judgment. The way my kids, my own flesh and blood, were being pushed further and further out of the family circle. And I, being the fool that I was, kept making excuses. Mom's just stressed. Dad's just old-fashioned. They don't mean anything by it. I convinced myself I was overreacting. I told myself it would get better. Until this Christmas, when everything came crashing down. We walked in, arms full of gifts, kids bouncing with excitement. And at first, it felt normal. Relatives laughing, kids playing, the smell of dinner in the air. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, silently agreeing. Maybe this year will be different. And for a while, it was. Until the gift exchange. Until my mother decided to make a point. The gift exchange was always a big deal in my family. My mom prided herself on picking the perfect gifts. In reality, it was an unspoken ranking system. The more expensive, thoughtful, or extravagant your gift, the more she valued you. And my kids? They were about to find out exactly where they stood. One by one, gifts were handed out. My nieces and nephews tore into theirs, expensive toys, electronics, designer clothes. Even my wife got a cashmere scarf from my mom. And then my mom paused. She looked around the room, smiled, and in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, said it. Okay, that's it for the kids this year. And just like that, the room went silent. I felt Sarah tense beside me. Leo and Lily? They froze. I watched the excitement drain from their faces as realization sank in. They had been left out, excluded, humiliated, in front of their entire family. And my mother? She acted like it was nothing. Like my kids weren't standing right there. Like she hadn't just driven a knife through my chest. Mom, my voice was low. What did you just say? She blinked. Oh, we just didn't get anything for Leo and Lily this year. Just like that. As if she were talking about forgetting to pick up milk. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Why? She asked, voice tight. My mother sighed. Like we were being difficult. Like we were the problem. Well, honey, they just don't really fit in anymore, do they? And in that moment, I knew we were done. Everything blurred after that. Sarah gripping my arm. My dad was trying to smooth things over. My brother Mark muttering about us being too sensitive. My kids? Shrinking. Leo, normally so full of energy, was standing there stiff and silent. Lily, barely 5, hiding behind Sarah, tears welling in her big brown eyes. And I felt rage like I had never felt before. Because how dare they? How dare they humiliate my children in front of everyone? How dare they treat them like they were disposable? Something inside me snapped. And for the first time in my life, I saw my parents for who they were. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. That's enough. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was final. We're leaving. And just like that, it was over. We gathered our kids, ignored my mother's half-hearted attempts to explain, ignored my father's weak excuses, ignored the whispers from relatives. We left. And the entire drive home, I couldn't stop thinking. This is it. This is the moment everything changes. And I was right. Because 1 week later, my mother called, crying, begging. And for the first time in my life, I said no. Have you ever noticed how people only reach out when they need something? Not when they screw up. Not when they realize they hurt you. Not when they have a moment of self-awareness. No, they only reach out when their own world starts falling apart. And my mother? She was no exception. It had been a week since the Christmas disaster. A week of silence. No apologies. No explanations. Just radio silence. Sarah and I spent that time picking up the pieces, reassuring our kids that they were loved, that they weren't less than. That Christmas wasn't about who got the best gifts. And through it all, I kept waiting for my parents to reach out, for a moment of regret, for anything. But they never did. Not until they needed something. The call came on a Friday night. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hello. And then, the sound of my mother's sobbing. Oh, honey, I don't know what to do. I pulled the phone away, blinking. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What's wrong? I asked, voice flat. And that's when she dropped the bomb. The roof, sweetheart. The house is ruined. It's leaking everywhere. We don't have the money for repairs. Of course. Of course. After a week of ignoring us. The second she had a problem, suddenly, we were family again. I exhaled, rubbing my temple. Mom, what does this have to do with me? There was a pause. A brief hesitation. Then, the real reason for her call. Well, sweetheart, I know you're doing well. And we really thought you'd want to help your family in a time of need. I felt Sarah tense beside me. Because here it was. Not an apology. Not an ounce of self-awareness. Just another expectation that I would step up. Like I always had. Like I always would. Except this time was different. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Let me get this straight. She sniffled. You and Dad humiliated my kids. You embarrassed them in front of the entire family. And now, not even a week later, you're asking me for money. Silence. Then, oh, honey, don't be dramatic. It was just a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Because of course it was. Whenever they were in the wrong, it was always a misunderstanding. A miscommunication. A simple mistake. But when I made a choice they didn't like, it was betrayal. Mom, I'm not helping you. She gasped. Like I had just told her, I was personally burning the house down myself. But we're family. There it was. The magical word. The one they never used when it was me who needed something. The one they only pulled out when I had something to give. I sighed. No, Mom. We stopped being family when you decided my kids didn't matter to you. And then, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. 5 minutes later, my phone exploded with messages. My dad, my brother, even a few extended relatives had somehow gotten involved. All are saying the same thing. You're being cruel. They made a mistake, and now you're punishing them? You have the money. Why wouldn't you help your parents? And for the first time, I didn't care. Because where were these people last week? When my kids were standing there, humiliated? Where was this outrage when my mother clarified that my family didn't matter to her? Nowhere. Because back then, it wasn't their problem. But now that my parents needed money, suddenly, it was a family emergency. Yeah, not my problem. Sarah sat beside me, watching as I blocked every single number. Then, she smiled. Proud of you. And for the first time, I was proud of myself too. Because I finally learned the truth. Sometimes, the best thing you can do. It lets people deal with the consequences of their own actions. You ever notice how, when people realize they can't manipulate you, they start playing the victim instead? That's exactly what my parents did next. Because after years of expecting me to give, and me finally saying no, they didn't just accept it. Oh no, they made it everyone's problem. The fallout started immediately. One day after my mother's failed guilt trip, the Facebook posts began. Because of course they did. It's heartbreaking when the people you love turn their backs on you. After everything you've done for them, after all the sacrifices you made, they just walk away. Subtle, vague, clearly about me. And, of course, the comments flooded in. Relatives, family friends, even distant cousins who never liked me anyway. All sending sympathy. You deserve better. Some people just don't appreciate their parents anymore. Karma will come for them. I sat back, shaking my head. Because wow, they really went all in on playing the victims. And the best part? They still thought I was going to fold. They still thought I'd see these posts, feel guilty, and come running back with my wallet open. Too bad for them. I was done playing their game. A few days later, my brother Mark called. I let it go to voicemail. Because I already knew what this was about. Sure enough, his message was exactly what I expected. Hey man, look, I know things got heated, but Mom and Dad are really struggling right now. It's not about the past. It's about helping family when they need it. Can we just be adults and move on? Be adults. Move on. As if I was the one throwing a tantrum. As if I was the one blasting my problems all over Facebook. As if I was the one who had created this mess in the first place. I didn't even bother replying, because I wasn't interested in pretending anymore. Sarah, of course, saw the Facebook post too. She rolled her eyes, tossing her phone on the table. They think this is going to work? Yup. They have no shame. Nope. She studied me for a moment. So what now? And that's when it hit me. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to justify myself. I didn't have to convince anyone. I didn't have to fight their lies. Because at the end of the day, the truth didn't need my defense. It would stand on its own. And my parents? They were about to learn that the hard way. The real turning point came a week later. I was at work when my phone buzzed. A message from my aunt, one of the few relatives who had a brain. Hey, just thought you should know. Your parents have been telling everyone that you left them homeless. I blinked. What? I called her immediately. Homeless. She sighed. Yeah, they're going around saying you abandoned them in their darkest hour, and now they might lose the house. I laughed. Because what? Their house, the one they had refused to downsize when they retired. Their massive home with extra guest rooms they never used? The home they had chosen to keep instead of being responsible? Was that my fault now? Unbelievable. I exhaled. Aunt Linda, you know that's not true, right? Of course I do. But not everyone does. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just about me cutting them off. This was about them rewriting history, twisting the story, making themselves the helpless victims. And if I didn't do something, people would believe them. I opened Facebook, took a deep breath, and posted. Since my parents have decided to spread lies about me, let's set the record straight. First, I never left them homeless. They chose to keep a house they can't afford. Second, I supported them financially for years. When I finally stopped, they retaliated. Third, they humiliated my children on Christmas. That was the moment I walked away. Fourth, if you still think I'm in the wrong, then feel free to open your own wallet and help them out. But I won't be manipulated anymore. Have a great day. And then, I logged off and let the truth do its thing. The reaction? Explosive. Relatives started calling out my parents. Wait, didn't they just go on vacation last summer? If they're struggling, why haven't they downsized? Wait, they really left their own grandkids out of Christmas? The entire narrative collapsed. Because the truth? It wasn't on their side. And now? Everyone knew it. Mom deleted her dramatic posts. Dad stopped responding to messages. And for the first time, they had no one left to blame. Because when people finally saw them for what they were, manipulative, entitled, selfish, they did what all narcissists do. They disappeared. And that was better than any apology. That night, I sat on the couch, scrolling through the chaos I had caused. Sarah curled up beside me, peeking at my phone. So, did we just witness your parents' social downfall? I smirked. Yup. She grinned. Nice. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Because I wasn't just done with them. I was done caring what they thought. And that was the most powerful thing of all. Have you ever realized that the best way to win against toxic people is it to stop playing their game? That's what finally hit me. For years, my parents had been using the same tired playbook. Manipulation, guilt, twisting the story to make themselves the victims. And me? I used to fall for it every time. Until now. Until I finally understood that the best response was no response at all. After my Facebook post exposed them, my parents did something I never expected. They shut up. No more dramatic posts. No more guilt-tripping messages. No more flying monkeys trying to change my mind. Just silence. And at first, it felt weird. Like the eye of a storm, too quiet, too still. Like they were waiting for me to mess up. Like they still believed I'd crack under the pressure and come crawling back. But here's the thing. That version of me, the one who felt guilty, who questioned every boundary, who worried about being the bad guy, he was gone. A month passed. Life was peaceful. Sarah and I took the kids on a weekend getaway, the kind of trip I would have felt guilty spending money on before. But this time, no guilt, no worries. Because for once, my money was being spent on the people who actually mattered. And my parents? They were finally dealing with the reality they had created. Or so I thought. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from my brother, Mark. I almost didn't answer. Because last time, he had called to tell me to be an adult and move on. But against my better judgment, I picked up. And man, I should have let it go to voicemail. Hey, listen, he started. No greeting. No small talk. Just go straight to the demand. Mom and Dad need your help. Again, I closed my eyes. Mark, are you serious? He sighed, already exasperated. Look, I get it, all right? You're mad. You made your point. But this is different. I exhaled. How exactly? And then he dropped the next bombshell. Dad's sick. That made me pause. Because for all the anger, all the resentment, the idea of my father genuinely suffering, that hit different. So, I softened. What's going on? Mark hesitated, which was never a good sign. Then he mumbled. He's stressed. His blood pressure is high. He's not sleeping. The whole situation with you has been really hard on him. I blinked. Then I realized. This wasn't about actual sickness. This was about me. I let out a slow, measured breath. So let me get this straight. His illness is just stress? And that's somehow my fault? Mark hesitated again, because even he knew how ridiculous it sounded. But he doubled down. He's just struggling with all this family tension. I don't see why you can't just fix things. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not because Dad was actually in danger. Not because they wanted a real conversation. But because they wanted me to be the problem solver. Again. So what exactly am I supposed to fix, Mark? Just apologize. Call them. In this stupid feud. I laughed. Because wow. The way he just glossed over everything. The years of emotional abuse. The humiliation of my children. The public smear campaign they tried to pull. And now? Now I was the one who needed to fix it. Yeah, not happening. Mark, let me make this really simple for you. I didn't start this. Mom and Dad did. They made their choices, and now they have to live with them. They're struggling? That sucks. But it's not my job to fix their mistakes anymore. And if Dad is really so stressed that it's making him sick, maybe he should stop making himself a victim in a mess he created. Silence. Then, wow, Mark muttered. You really don't give a damn, do you? And there it was. The final guilt trip. A last-ditch effort to make me question myself. To make me feel like the monster. But guess what? It didn't work. Because I did care. I just didn't care on their terms anymore. Take care, Mark. And with that, I ended the call. And I felt lighter than I had in years. That was the last time I heard from any of them. The last guilt trip. The last desperate attempt at control. After that, they finally got the message. I was done. And you know what? They never reached out again. Because the truth? They never wanted a son. They wanted a provider. A fixer. A backup plan. And now that I wasn't playing that role, I was useless to them. And that was their final punishment. They had to live in the world they created, without me in it. And for the first time, I was completely okay with that. Have you ever noticed how, when toxic people finally realize they have no control over you, they just vanish? That's what my parents did next. No more calls. No more guilt tripping. No more dramatic Facebook posts. Just silence. And at first, I kept waiting for the next shoe to drop. For the next emotional ambush. For them to pull another stunt to drag me back in. But it never came. And you know what? That was the moment I knew I had won. At first, it felt weird. I had spent my entire life being the fixer. The problem solver. The one who always gave in to keep the peace. And now? Now there was no problem to solve. No battle to fight. Just silence. And instead of feeling lost, I felt free. Sarah and I started doing something we had never done before. Spending money on ourselves. Not recklessly. Not to prove a point. But just because we could. Because, for the first time, I wasn't funding other people's bad decisions. I wasn't being bled dry. I wasn't a family ATM. So, we took the kids on a real vacation. Somewhere sunny. Somewhere. My parents would have called it irresponsible. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel guilty about it. Because I had earned this peace. And I wasn't giving it up for anyone. Months passed. Then, one day, out of nowhere, a letter arrived. Not a text. Not an email. An actual, physical letter from my parents. And the moment I saw it, I knew. This was their last attempt. Their final play. And I was finally ready to read it. The letter was exactly what I expected. Long. Dramatic. A desperate attempt to rewrite history. It started with the usual guilt trip. We've been thinking a lot about the past, and we're heartbroken over how things have turned out. Then came the self-pity. We never wanted this distance, but you forced our hand. Then the gaslighting. We always did what we thought was best for you. Maybe we weren't perfect, but no parents are. And then, The final manipulation attempt. At the end of the day, we're still your parents. And family forgives. So we hope you can let go of your resentment and come back to us. I stared at the letter. Then, without a second thought, I threw it in the trash. Because here's the thing. I had already forgiven them. Not for them. Not because they deserved it. But because I deserved to move on. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean opening the door to people who only see you as a resource. It doesn't mean letting toxic people waltz back and like nothing ever happened. I had made my choice. And nothing. Not a letter. Not guilt. Not family obligations. I was going to change that. A few days later, I told Sarah about the letter. She smirked. Let me guess. They didn't actually apologize. I laughed. Nope. Classic. We clinked our glasses. Because for the first time, we were celebrating a future that belonged to us. No guilt. No baggage. No parents saw us as walking wallets. And that was the best feeling in the world. Do you ever realize how peaceful life gets when you finally cut off the people draining your energy? That's what happened next. No more tense phone calls. No more walking on eggshells. No more wondering when the next guilt trip would drop. For the first time in my life, I felt free. And the best part? I didn't miss them. Not even a little. A few months after the final letter, I started noticing something. Something odd. My social media had been quiet. Too quiet. No more passive-aggressive posts from my mom. No distant relatives reaching out to talk some sense into me. Nothing. At first, I thought they had finally given up. But then, I realized the truth. They weren't done. They were just changing tactics. One day, Sarah was scrolling through her phone when she frowned. Babe." I looked up. "What's up?" She turned her screen toward me. It was a Facebook post from my mom. But this time, instead of being about me, it was about them. Life has been hard lately, but we're staying strong. We never expected to be in this situation, but sometimes you find out who truly cares about you. Thank you to those who have stuck by us in these difficult times. I blinked. Sarah rolled her eyes. So they're just full-on begging for sympathy now? I exhaled. Because of course, they had spent years using me as a financial safety net. And now that I was gone, they were looking for a new one. A few days later, I got a call from my Aunt Linda. She was one of the few reasonable people in the family. So, when she called, I picked up. And man, I was not ready for what she told me next. "Your parents are selling the house." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "Yup. They put it on the market last week. They can't afford it anymore." I sat back, processing. Because wow, they had really done it. They had spent every last penny and finally backed themselves into a corner. And now they were being forced to do the one thing they always refused to do. Take responsibility. I should have felt bad. I should have felt something. But instead, I just felt relief. Because of this wasn't my problem. Not anymore. A week later, I got one final text from my dad. Short, bitter, straight to the point. "I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then, I smiled. Because yeah, I was happy. For the first time in my life, I had no regrets. You ever have one of those moments where you realize you're finally completely free? That was me, sitting in my kitchen, reading my dad's final, bitter text. "I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted." And instead of feeling guilty, instead of feeling obligated, I felt something else entirely. Peace. Because yeah, I did get what I wanted. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel bad about it. After that, my parents disappeared. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. No more texts. No more calls. No more guilt trips. They weren't checking in. They weren't trying to manipulate me. They weren't even pretending anymore. Because the second they realized I was never coming back, I stopped being useful to them. And that was the final confirmation I needed. They never wanted a son. They wanted a provider. And when I stopped being one, they stopped being family. A few months later, Sarah and I took the kids on another trip. This time, Disney. The kind of trip I used to put off because of all the financial stress my parents created. And let me tell you, watching my kids laugh, run around, experience pure joys, knowing that they would never have to deal with the guilt and obligation I grew up with. That was the best feeling in the world. One night, as we sat on the balcony of our hotel, Sarah turned to me. "Do you ever think about reaching out?" I thought about it for a second, then shook my head. "No, not anymore." She smiled. Good. Because she knew. She knew how hard it had been. How long it had taken me to stop feeling responsible for people who never cared about me. And now? Now I was finally living my own life. Not for them, not to prove anything, but because I deserved it. A year passed, then 2, then 3, and the longer I went without them, the more I realized something important. Family isn't about blood. It's about who actually gives a damn about you. And my parents? They never did. But Sarah did. My kids did. Jake, my best friend, did. I wasn't alone. I never had been. And for the first time, I finally understood. I was exactly where I was meant to be, without them. And that was the happiest ending I could ever ask for.